What's going on YouTube? My name is Rhett here with Tier 1 Gaming, liking to report to you all that I placed first at the Kentucky Regionals playing tearlament pile. Deck performed amazing and I loved everything about it. It was all gas, no brakes, no bricks, no nothing. I would like to show you guys all my list and tell me what you guys think in the comments below, please. I played 2 copies of Tearlament's Reno Heart. It's one of the best normal summons in the deck. I decided to play it too because I play a lot of ways to search it, and doesn't inherently give me too much plus advantage. It just straight gets me into Kit Kalos. That's why I decided to play it at 2 copies instead of 3. I always saw it when I needed it, and I feel like the ratios maybe could be bumped up to 3, but overall it was really good. Next, I played 3 copies of Tearlament Havens. This card overperformed every time I saw it, and I milled it. I milled great. I fusion summoned. I stopped my opponent right in their tracks. Even after they dark rollered me, I made the same board I just made, all because of this card. This card is insane. Next, I played 3 copies of Merlai. I see a lot of lists playing this at 2, but it synergizes way too well with some of the other engines I'm playing in the deck. Plus, it also says mill 3 when it's a normal or special summoned, regardless of condition of how it's normal or special summoned, which does synergize a lot with the deck. And lastly, for the Tearlament cards, 3 copies of Tearlament Siren. This card is the extender. This card helps unbrick hands if you have like a Shaddoll Beast or a Shaddoll Squamata in hand, or even a Despian Tragedy, or a Tearlament monster too that's sent to the graveyard to procs for a guaranteed fusion summon. This card is just the level 4 extender to help you go into time 3 free doer. It mills 3 on summon. You just declare effects, special summon, mill 3 cards, discard the card from hand, all for effect. And then every time I saw this card just helped me play through so much. Even if I had like a Gamma in hand, I activate this, they attempt to Ash or negate, I'd Gamma, and it was just so strong. Next, I played 1 Shaddoll Beast and 1 Shaddoll Squamata. I liked playing the ratios at 2, as you see. So I also played 1 Aluber and 1 Tragedy. When Tragedy is into the graveyard, it searches Aluber. They both can be put on the deck to just be continuously cycled. The same thing with Squamata and Beast. These are the searchers. These are what gives me card advantage. And Shaddoll Beast, and this was always helpful to see, especially turn 0, making Masquerade or Winda to stop my opponent dead in their tracks and make sure they're not leaving me in the dust as I'm stopping them. For a little engine that I decided to play on the spot, I wasn't quite sure how this would work out, but I played 3 copies of Swap Frog and 1 copies of the Ronin Totem. I was I was tired of seeing Splight do this to me over and over and over again. I was like, but it does synergize with the deck, you know, because it gets milled to the graveyard. Once it's in graveyard, you know, they have graveyard effects to bring each other out, and they're level 2s that can be special summoned off of other cards in my deck. And I thought I'd give this card a shot, and did this overperform? Absolutely. These cards were insane. I cannot see playing the deck without it now. But moving on, I played 3 copies of Psyframe Gear Gamma. This card was very clutch because a lot of the effects activate in hand, and they're all ashable or any other kind of hand trappable or even omni-negatable, and I don't want that to happen. So Gamma's really strong in this matchup to help make sure my stuff resolves. And even if Gamma's dead, I always need discard fodder for stuff like my Tearlament Siren, or even just discard fodder for stuff like Super Poly. So they may have been dead, they were never just truly dead. But I'm also playing 3 copies of Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion. Ignore the ugly Secret Rare, I couldn't find a gold rare in time. But I decided to play Ghost Spell because Ash does not seem like it does enough this format, whereas Ghost Spell is protection, it's offense, and it's so versatile that it works out so great. Even in like punk matchups, this was really useful to stop Gizmek, or even to set for a Super Poly to get rid of some of their monsters because they're Earth. This card just crazily overperformed, and I loved every second of seeing this in my opening hand because I knew I could play safe, and if I didn't need it, it always was good interruption for my opponent. Moving on to some busted spells. 3 copies of the, still cannot say its name, but it's the Tearlament Field Spell. Starting building the deck, I thought that it maybe wasn't the best card and I shouldn't play it, But after play testing it and playing it at this regionals, I was wrong. This card is insane. Everyone should play this at 3. Even like the small things about like the 500 attack point boost, crazy. This card is nuts. Speaking of nuts cards, Instant Fusion. This card pretty much just says I get to play my whole turn uninterrupted, no hand traps needed. Pay 1,000, summons out Kit Kalos. Kit Kalos full combos by itself without having to research a normal summon. It's so strong. You don't have to do anything to graveyard. And then at the end of the turn, it kills the tearlament Kit Kat, which then mills 5 cards, so you can keep comboing off even if it's negated. Now 3 copies of Super Polymerization and 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. These were the board breakers. These cards were what let me play the game going second, or even in follow-up turns when I just needed a way to out and hard to kill boss monsters. Dark Ruler No More and Super Polymerization just cleared the way for my deck to just win. To make sure I could see those good cards. Pot of Prosperity. And then for some little bit of spice, I played 1 Meta Noise and 1 Brandon Red. This is the only target I have for Luberg, and the only thing it can really make is Guardian Chimera. I mean, it can make Masquerade, but usually I like to make Masquerade with graveyard effects. And Guardian Chimera was such a strong card that I really wanted to play this and the whole engine of 2 cards just to search this card out, because it was so strong. And every time I saw this right here, or the engine at all, Guardian Chimera was a house of a card that just put up so much work. And I chose to play Meta Noise specifically because Meta Noise was the Book of Moon, which helps with the worst matchups. Because typically this deck struggles with decks that continue to go gas for days. Because Book of Mooning the initial play of something stops them from going to Link, Synchros, or Xyz with that monster. And that just overall just makes the card invaluable. Plus the ability to Foolish from deck to help fusion summon later after this effect resolves. It's just, in my opinion, one of the best of it. And that's all for the main deck. 41 cards in total. It was 40 cards when I played 3 Ash, but I wanted to put the driver package in there, so I had to make it 41. I couldn't justify cutting anything else. But moving on to the extra deck, I played 1 copy of Toad and 1 copy of Time Thief Redoer. These 2 cards are just houses of Xyz monsters. This 1 card alone gave me a grind game that just outgrinded even the best of the Spite decks I played against. And Time Thief Redoer is just a constant threat that just keeps taking stuff from my opponents, giving me a non-target, put to the top of the deck, and then draws. The card was just insane, overperformed. I can't say enough about these 2 cards. These cards are just what made or break my deck. Next, I played 2 copies of Predaplant Dracostapelia. I wish I could play this at 3, because sometimes I had enough gas to make 3 of them, and every time I overextended and made multiple copies of these, I got punished by the Dark Ruler, and that's okay. But these cards were insane. The Levy Modulation that just happens by having a Predator counter on it, and the ability to also passively negate everything with a counter on it, it's just so good. And then 2 copies of Shadal Winda. I see some people cut this down to 1, but every time I play one of these and it gets interrupted with, I always really wish I had the second one, just so I could remake the second Winda and keep having a floodgate up on my opponent's turn. That way my opponent can't play their turn. And lastly, 2 Super Poly targets, Garura and Mud Dragon of the Swamp. These 2 cards are just houses of Super Poly targets that just dismantle most any board I play against. And even if I'm not Super Polying these away, these are still sometimes really good to make to just have versatility with your deck. That way you can play around certain interactions with your opponent. And then lastly, 1 Kaleido Heart and 1 Kit Kalos. I decided to play these at 1 and 1 each because I never saw myself making or needing the second Kit Kalos, and leaving it engraved. So I always just seem to return it to the extra deck, and at this point I just could not justify playing it at 2 when I needed the space for other things in my extra deck. I played it at 1, and you know what? It never came up that I needed 2 of them. And I played 1 Kaleido Heart. This card is literally insane, but you never need it more than 1. And they can out it the first time, it brings itself back to do it again, which was just crazy. Next, 1 Guardian Chimera and then 1 Masquerade. These are what the 2 monsters I make off the branded package. I don't know if you noticed, but I have the more or less set out here for the Shaddoll. That's for the branded, and these are for just pure tearlaments to just keep making generically good boss monsters to help stop my opponent. And these are for super polys, other stuff to stop my opponent. And then lastly, stuff to stop my opponent: the Hark, Access Code, and Spite Elf. This combos really well with Totally Awesome and some of the main deck monsters because this quick effect special summons out Merlai. Merlai effect on summon mills 3 cards to help get combos going. It also, just like Sprite does, keeps bringing this back to just keep negating, bring back, negating. But this has a lovely effect for this thing, for this deck specifically, where it adds back any any water monster, and it just happens that the best normal summon in the deck is in water. It was crazy. Halfway through my matches before I realized that that's an interaction that could happen, and once I learned that, wow, my grind games got so much better. The Hark is great because it takes stuff from your opponent, and then helps make Borrelsword Dragon, because Borrelsword Dragon, I believe, is the best way for this deck to OTK, because Access Code just really isn't a valuable target for this deck. Borrelsword Dragon did overperform how good it was. The ability to get over big boss monsters, big unaffected boss monsters like the Arrival, just gaining half attack to beat over for a little bit, was just so invaluable that I can't justify cutting it for any other kind of like beater. And lastly, for the side deck, I played 3 copies of Ghost Winter Cherries. This card came up so often with how generic of an extra deck I play. So I can get rid of Spite Elf, and I can get rid of Tearlament Kikalos from my opponents. And if I do that for the mirror match and for the Sprite matchup, they just auto lose to this deck. This card was just crazy good. Next, I played 3 copies of There Can Be Only One. This is the best floodgate for this deck because other decks can't play around this, whereas my deck has no issue playing around it because most of my stuff is different types. Next, I played 1 Crime. The 1 Crime was really good because I decided in going first to help pass stuff like specifically Evenly Matched, because that's a card that's been haunting me recently. And the fact that it negates and sends back the deck just so you don't have to worry about graveyard stuff for like normal summon monsters, it's just crazy. I see a lot of people aren't playing Crime, and I feel like Crime's a really good card, so I play it. Next, I play 3 copies of Lightning Storm. Lightning Storm is just generic for front row, back row, all row. It's an incredible card, especially when you actually can draw it, which I can't seem to do. But theoretically, it's really good. And then a card that I threw in for some spice that turned out to be really good: 2 copies of Dark Hole. I put a lot of thought into this over Raigeki because it's an out to Mystic Bind because it destroys your monsters, and it happens to also send your Tearlament monsters to graveyard by card effect. So that means if you have one of these on field that you can't use, you can just Dark Hole, get rid of it, and then use the effect in graveyard to fusion summon. It was a spice that not a lot of people saw. Some people laughed at it, and then I showed them why they shouldn't be laughing. Lastly, 3 copies of Mistaken Arrest. It says that neither player can add from a main deck to hand except for by drawing them. I don't really have a lot of stuff that adds from main deck to hand except for by drawing them. So if I can be miserable, no one can be miserable. And that was the main side and extra. 41 cards for main deck and 15 for front and side. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Feel free to drop a like and subscribe back for more videos as I'll update this deck list and further regional tops by the crew. Peace.